This is a little different format than what we've done in the past and probably how it's gone for this Lent. I hope it's been some good conversations, but we're actually doing a live podcast today. So if you have listened or even heard about our podcast, our church podcast, the Wayside podcast, we started it last fall, and this is my buddy Ryan Presley, a member of St. Martin's.
Also Astros pitcher.
Yes, and also the closer for the Astros. I can't tell you how many folks have come up to me. Is Ryan Presley actually the co-host on this?
It's kind of the running joke of the podcast. It's, how'd you get Ryan Presley on this podcast? And I like living in that anonymity of it all. But I am Presley like Elvis, so spelled correctly, Presley.
There you go.
And he has 2 S's, no hair, a really cool tattoo. But I always joke that I actually think that, you've heard this idea of like doppelgangers, where like there's someone living in another universe who's like exactly like you, but kind of subtly different. I think that Ryan Presley and me, Ryan Presley, are doppelgangers living in the same universe, because he has a wife named Catherine. I have a wife named Catherine, but she's Catherine with a K. He has a daughter. I feel like her name might actually be Eleanor, and I have a daughter named Eleanor. We have like all of these crazy similarities. He is a highly successful, awesome baseball player, and I'm talking to you on a Thursday night about life's U-turns. So, same but different.
That's right. So one thing that Ryan and I have tried to do over the past 24 episodes-ish is really do something a little different for St. Martin's, where so much of our stuff is lecture-based. And we have these great speakers who come in and they stand up for an hour and give a great speech, and it's amazing. But one thing that I long for is a deep connection through relationships, through conversations. And podcasts are the way to do that nowadays. And so the thought would be for it not to just be the Wesley Arning show for the next 45 minutes or so, but for Ryan and I to actually have a conversation, and that we will post this on our Wayside podcast, and that this can kind of be a dialogue of life's U-turns and where we have found God in that. And then if there's time for some conversation and questions, we can have that. But y'all are along for the ride whether you realized it or not.
Yes, this is also our first experiment with doing the podcast on video, right? Which a lot of famous podcasters do that. We are not trying to be famous. I don't even think we should call ourselves podcasters, but we're gonna give it a go, because again, to your point, I think it's an amazing ministry opportunity for our church, and it's just a great way for folks who, real talk, normally at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, I'm going to go pick up my daughter from school, and I couldn't come to an event like this. And yet, by putting it on our podcast, where our hope is that other folks in our massive parish are able to engage with this content and kind of think about some of the topics we're going to talk about tonight. So yeah, welcome everyone to the Wayside Podcast.
So to start thinking about life's U-turns, we've got a few visuals, and we won't go too much into those because I know when folks listen to this, they won't be able to see them, but we're showing a few pictures of me right now where it felt like from an early age, I felt called by God to be a priest. And so there I was in my living room, in grandparents' living room, playing church, and where other kids wanted to be police officers or firefighters, I just wanted to be like Father Gene Wise at my home church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And
Wes, I've seen you show this picture multiple times, and I've never had a chance to stop and ask you, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
What did you use for like a Eucharistic wine? Did you use
Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola.
Good Southerner.
Like a good Tennessee boy. No Pepsi-Cola in this house.
That's right.
Love it. Okay.
Yeah,
Noted. Noted.
Coke and crackers.
Coke and crackers.
So yeah, very. It's amazing that we didn't burn down the house with as many candles as I have in our living room lit at one time.
Noted.
But I grew up in a really church-going home. Grew up in the Episcopal Church. Was formed by the liturgy, and so it just seemed evident that I was going to be a priest come hell or high water. And so went straight from college into seminary, and from seminary, really kind of a tragedy and kind of beautiful thing kind of mixed together in that one of the priests that I knew in the Diocese of Tennessee, who I'd known since I was a teenager, he had been at this church in Madison, Tennessee for 10 years. And I remember talking to him when he started that ministry, that of what is it like there? And then 10 years later, because he battled depression and a lot of things were going on in his life, he took his own life. And the bishop asked if I would come in and be priest in charge and then rector of that church. And I was 25 years old. So show next slide there. So coming in and kind of the strangeness of how God works is that as a teenager, I was suicidal. I had worked in youth group opportunities where some of our teenagers had taken their life, and so I had walked with youth groups in that, and then here I was now running a church where wrestling a lot with what does it mean for loss, and how do you deal with that as individuals, but then also as communities. And so that was a U-turn in some ways of feeling called there. But what I really want to talk about is how God was then kind of calling me to St. Martin's, because that in and of itself is just kind of a strange story. I met Russ when I was a senior at seminary at VTS, where he went, and we kind of connected, and we hit it off. And then he would call, and I would go, I think I need to go back to Tennessee. 3 months later, he would call again, and he did that for 3 years. So he is persistent, and poor Laura, who knows how many times she said no before and he just kept at it every couple months.
Just wouldn't let you get away.
That's right. And so for me, there was this struggle with having Russ call, and then kind of the weird world of how God works. Marty Bastian went to seminary with my predecessor. They were best friends in seminary. And so I then got connected with Marty because he knew Rob Courtney, who was the rector of my former church. And Marty and I talked every Friday for over an hour. And I went, here's the guy, vice rector at the largest Episcopal church, who is taking an hour for little old me every Friday. And he became not just a mentor, but a brother in some ways. And as the pandemic wore on, and you can see one of our pictures of outdoor church and kind of the back lawn, and half of those people are my family.
Half our listeners are our family.
That's right. But it was such a sweet community, and all my family is in Nashville. I just buried my grandfather on Monday, and just kind of assumed that I was going to be in Nashville till all my grandparents passed away. I was going to do their funeral, but dadgummit, they kept living, and so I had to. And so it was really kind of this bittersweet moment of loving the church that I was in, loving being around my family again for the first time in 7 years. And after 3 years of change and transition, trying to help a community deal with loss and pain, and then have a really good year of ministry, and then the pandemic happened, and that stretch. And Ryan, I know you kind of have wrestled with kind of these moments of trying to figure out hinge moments in our life.
Yeah.
I don't know, how did you process that, and tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so I think a lot of resonance between your trajectory and those moments of U-turn. So I am not originally from Houston, Texas. I'm from North Carolina. I came here in 2008 as a teacher, actually. Many of you maybe have kids or grandkids who did Teach for America. I did Teach for America. I went to the University of North Carolina, and after college, like most kids around the time of the recession, I didn't exactly know what to do in the best job market ever, so I decided to join Teach for America. And my number one place that I wanted to go, you get to choose back in the day which city you wanted to teach in. So I wanted to go to New Orleans because Katrina had happened while I was in college. But then I put Houston as my second choice. And at that time, if you put Houston, you got sent to Houston, because we had Teach for America had a very large presence, and still does to some degree here in Houston. So I came to teach. Education, I studied political science and religious studies. and I taught 5th grade math and science on the east end of Houston, in Magnolia Park. So clearly my education set me up for success for that job. And entering Teach for America, like many people, my intent was to go to law school. I'm going to do this for 2 years. My mother was like an assistant teacher. She was worked in education, Sunday school, things like that. So I feel like education was somewhat in our blood, but I fell in love with teaching, right? Whether it was genetic or conditions or whatever. So moved to Houston, started teaching for Houston ISD, and kind of year over year I stayed in the profession. About 5 years in, I did say, you know what? It's been 5 years. I always thought I wanted to go to law school. I went to law school for 3 days. I got through my full cycle of classes at UH Law Center, so apologies to any great alum of that fine institution. Fun fact, if you get out of law school during the first week, they will give you all your money back. So thank the good Lord I didn't stay through Friday. So I left on a Wednesday, and that was a U-turn, but we don't have enough time to go through that one. So I'm gonna fast forward a little bit. By the grace of God, I literally got my same job back. I was an assistant principal after being in HISD for a while. I moved to KIPP, Houston, which I'm sure most of you nodding heads, it's a pretty prominent charter school network here, and started in Houston and then now across the country. And so I got my job back and stayed in education. Kind of continued as an assistant principal for many years, and then I became a school principal. The picture you see up on the screen, and for those who aren't here and we're just listening, we'll put all these images in the show notes if you want to reminisce alongside us. But so this was me with one of my students. At the time the photo was taken, she was in 8th grade, but I knew her when she was in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. So one of the things that just kept me in education as a vocation is just that ability to get to know kids and families and to follow them through time. And so I love my work. I eventually, most recently in education, founded a new school. So as you might know, with KIPP schools, unlike traditional public schools, we open new schools in communities as an alternative, as an option for students and families. So I opened up a school off of Highway 90 in Hillcroft. There used to be a racetrack there, if you've been in Houston for a long time. We built our school on top of that old racetrack by Butler, or was it Butler Stadium? There's a stadium on that part of town. Yeah, so our school, that blue building, is over there now. But I conveniently opened a school as the pandemic started. And by started, I mean raged, right? Lockdown, all of that. So my experience was a lot of kids in masks. I opened a kindergarten. I was an elementary school principal, so I opened with kindergarten and 1st grade. So just little kids who are great at learning on the computer from their house, on Zoom. Said no one ever. So this, for me, this was my experience as a founding school leader, right? It's meeting kids in a car. It's a lot of things on Zoom. On that picture on the right, you can see we're doing a whole school assembly, but we can't be together. So everyone's in their classrooms, but then there are other kids who are at home who were piped into the same Zoom meeting for us during our whole school moments. Founding a school was an incredibly joyous thing to do. It's one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life, up there with, marrying my wife and having 2 awesome daughters. But quietly, it was also the most challenging and gut-wrenching thing I've ever done in my life. Being in education, if you know any educators or if you yourself have been an educator, you know this to be true. And we say it as a trope, right? But it is truly one of the hardest jobs that there is. And anyone who navigated that work during the height of the pandemic knows that acutely. So a couple years ago, going into kind of my U-turn moment, kind of as it relates to my time as a principal, I was about to start the next school year. Things had kind of normalized. Most kids are back in school. Things seemed fine. And I started to really battle with a lot of mental health stuff. I had a succession of panic attacks, and I think the best way I like to describe it to people, because when this sort of episodes happen in your life, often what gets asked is what was the thing? What happened? And I was I got up on a Tuesday morning and felt like I was having a heart attack. The best way I can describe it is I had lived my life professionally and personally up to that point thinking like life can be like a little bento box, like kind of one of those little boxes that has all these compartments in it, right? And I think one of the things that made me very successful as a school leader, and maybe just as a human period, was my ability to compartmentalize things. So I could at once run a school with students who live in under-resourced neighborhoods, who are trying to survive a pandemic, while also being a father and a husband and all of those things. And one day, one of those little walls on that little bento box cracked. And everything started to come together. And the weight of that it's like nothing I'd ever experienced in my life. And that succession, right, of, panic attacks, and that was also for the first time in my life where I had to start thinking about my own mental health like one would traditionally think of their physical health, right, in terms of the choices I was making. And ultimately, one of those choices that I made was to leave that career. Like I walked away from school leadership, and it was incredibly hard. That story in tandem, I think it's also important to so how does faith figure into that, right, for me? And so I've been raised in the church since I was a kid. I was not an Episcopalian. I was raised a Southern Baptist. And not sure what the laugh's about, but no, I'm just kidding. I think I get what you're saying. No, I'm just kidding. My mom listens to this. But so faith, we were a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday type of people, right? I will contend that former Southern Baptists make the best Anglicans and Episcopalians because, yes, right, my people, right? And I'll tell you why. Number one, we know our Bible. Number two, we are great at devotion. My mother still gets up every day and will send me pictures from that Daily Bread book. And the Daily Office is basically that, but you get what I'm saying, right? So faith had always been an important part of my life, but as I got more and more into my career, it got compartmentalized as well. And it got put into one of those boxes. And the size of that box shrunk and shrunk and shrunk until basically it was non-existent, right? So in those moments, and that probably of all the moments in my life, the feeling of despair, right? Where I have to reckon with the fact that I tried to be in control of everything and lost control. I didn't choose to have these panic attacks. I would have chosen anything to not have that happen. Made me re-examine the seeds that had been planted in my heart from all those days of going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and on Wednesdays as well, right? And that's all because of the grace of God through my parents. Without that, I don't think that this moment would be a U-turn. I think it could have just been a continued spin out, right? Because I did early on, talked to my therapist about this actually pretty recently. I did early on try to think I could control what was happening, right? There's a checklist for this, right? You're having a panic attack? Grab that binder. Open up to page 4. What do? You get a therapist. Maybe you take some time off from work. Maybe you get on medication. I was drinking a pot of coffee a day. I'm prone to high anxiety. That's a bad idea, right? I'm gonna go decaf for a little while. That's probably real talk, that's probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Coming off the caffeine, it is a drug.
The true U-turn.
The true U-turn. Let's talk about caffeine. No. But what I've realized is even in those early days, I was trying to control it. I was trying to impose my will and my need for control in those steps I was taking. Because then I got super frustrated because I'm like, well, gosh, I've been on this medicine for 2 weeks. I'm seeing a therapist. I'm doing these things. Why isn't it better yet, right? Why can't I just go back to the way things were? And I guess by definition, that's those U-turn moments, And for me, it was frustrating because I look back and I think about all the signs that I had that things weren't actually okay, right? And I think to myself, gosh, why did I just follow the first sign, right? Why did I have to get to that point? And I think that's another lesson that I've learned from these U-turn moments is that Your process is your process. You're reckoning with whatever you're reckoning with. Like, you have to cede control to the higher power that is driving that thing, right? So for me, like, a big part of just thinking about U-turns is thinking about control, right? So, to kind of like somewhat give you a piece of the story and kind of maybe think about some reflection for it. So we met because you started working here, and I, as someone who was taking a little bit of time / looking for a new job, could go to a service at noon on a Wednesday. And I was like, you know what? Like, we had started going back to church, St. Martin's. At the time I had like a 4-year-old and like a baby. So family table was starting to be an option for us. Like, y'all, if you have never gone to family table, that is an exercise in a lot of things. You should come because but it's an outlet that allows young parents to be able to experience the word and the sacraments, right? So we started going, but going on Wednesdays is when one day you came up to me and were literally like, "What are you doing here?"
If you go to the noonday service, I mean, it's a faithful bunch of folks. But you normally don't see folks like Ryan, either you're getting off of work or you're taking a lunch hour. So it's a little different to see Ryan sitting there. And for me, it was fairly new when I got here, and kind of in the transition, there is this mourning that I'm having of leaving my church. And I don't think you realize, and I didn't realize till I actually did it myself as a priest, of how much it hurts us to leave. Like, it's always exciting, priest is being sent to another church, and it's great and it's wonderful for them. But I was in this moment of deep mourning of leaving not only my family, but this church that I love, and kind of feeling the strangeness of God's presence, of saying, all right, it's time to go, even though it doesn't feel like it's time to go. I mean, thinking about having to leave the school as well.
Oh, I was mourning too.
That there's this strange transition of the exciting opportunity to come to St. Martin's. And I think we got like 70 cards saying welcome. It felt like it was just nonstop of you all welcoming us. And so there was this excitement and this strange sense of guilt of leaving. And so just trying to find my way around in some ways of what is life at St. Martin's going to be, what does ministry look like here? I'm not the rector anymore. I don't have to worry about if that light bulb is out, that I'm not the one getting on the ladder, or I'm not the one mowing the yard if need be, or plunging the toilets. All wonderful things that have built character. But it was really kind of a moment of discernment, kind of in this transition and change, this U-turn of some sorts that seemed like our choice, but was also very much kind of like God working in this moment, that when kind of Ryan and I's path just kind of crossed.
Yeah. One of the other reasons why we chose to make this a podcast, it's not just because Wesley was doing it, and he also has a new book out that you should get, The Waters of Baptism. No, that's reason numbers 2 and 3. The number one reason is because, as we started talking about this, the existence of this podcast, the reason we're talking into these funny microphones with this little screen right here, is because this is a product of a U-turn.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I was very reluctant at first. Like, so what we started to do is we'd see each other at church on Wednesdays or sometimes on Sundays. It's like, hey, let's go have lunch. I think we've been to 8 Air Kitchen. We should have a stamp card, because literally we would have burned through like 4 or 5 of them.
Oh, you don't have one yet? I've got one.
Yeah. They do have a point system though, which if you skip that step when you're signing your signature, don't skip that step, because their rewards are pretty nice. And I think you can use them at the other family restaurants like Los Tios. A plug for them. Anyways, yes, you can. I hear someone saying that. But no, so we'd go to lunch and we'd get to know each other. And one day, new to the parish, I think you're thinking like, hey, like let's try this new ministry, right? Let's try a podcast. And I'm thinking, sure, like, what is the last thing this world needs? Another podcast, right? Like, there's a podcast about everything. And I think a podcast is sometimes not the most positive things in the world out there. But I said, all right, sure. Well, your persistence, I guess that's rubbing off on you being here at St. Martin's now, meant that like you kept on it, and next thing I know, like we're ordering things, and it's just kind of the snowballs going. And in my mind, I thought, all right, two guys. We like talking theology and Bible and stuff like that. What is it? What are we going to talk about, and what's it going to sound like? Like we're going to sound like we're in a garage talking into two Campbell soup cans or something. For anyone who hasn't listened to it, it's super impressive. That's not because of us. It's definitely because of Robert Killingsworth, our executive producer. For those in the room, the guy sitting out over there in the green. Amazing, yes. So this thing just kind of started to happen, and it is. I think I've always in my life, call it a function of my generation or education, combination thereof, I've always been skeptical of the Spirit. I've always been skeptical, right? Like, oh, what happened? Oh, the Spirit, right? And the U-turn that has created this podcast and certainly our relationship as a result of that is a huge reminder that like I need to get out of my own head and out of the way and realize that the Spirit moves in ways that aren't mine to understand, but mine to have the great pleasure of being a part of being grateful for. It's like wind in sails, you know? We've met some awesome people as a result of this, and none of that would have happened. You just think about the domino effect, and I think that's probably too simplistic of a metaphor to think about how things proceed in our lives, but this ripple effect that it has had that, to reckon with control. And like even in this podcast, right? Like, we always joke, we talk with people, we come in with a plan, but organically things change. Like we interviewed Fleming Rutledge and it's like we were two, giddy folks who just adore this great thinker and preacher of our time. And we send her we can't believe she said yes. And we show up and we're on Zoom and we're all ready and we've got like 10 questions and we've sent them to her beforehand. We asked her, I think, 2.5 questions and talked to her for 3 hours. I mean, it was like a high point in my life. I think I'm going to say probably ours lives, right? But like just to feel the Spirit move in those conversations, and it's just been such a learning experience for me to just loosen my grip a little bit.
And that's what I think about for all of us, of these moments in our lives where we have choices, where doors open and Lord, do I go through that door or do I not? I mean, I don't know how many folks that I talk to, especially the young adults that I work with a lot, that they have opportunities in life. Do I go to grad school? Do I continue in this relationship? I mean, there are all these opportunities, and it's hard to know when to walk through that door or when something terrible has happened and there's a shift, and like, what is the opportunity there? Because it's so easy in a terrible moment to blame God or to say that He is absent. And then there's another way of thinking about it, of what is the opportunity that God is inviting us in this moment. And every time that I've had to leave a community, which has been a couple times now, it hurts. And yet at the same time, many of those relationships continue on. Not in a pastoral role anymore, but in a friendship role, that the relationship has changed in that way. And at the same moment, new relationships open up that are beautiful and amazing, and that would have never happened if I did not take that step of faith. That doesn't always mean that you've got to move somewhere new, but to take a risk and see what God may be inviting you into. That's the really tough thing. So Ryan, I'm curious, in these moments, and maybe especially kind of during that crisis moment of trying to figure out your life, what's next, all that, what are some anchors that kind of helped you, guide you into this U-turn?
Yeah. I certainly think the pandemic was, and continues to be for so many people, terrible, horrible, the impact that it has had in every facet of our lives, if you're alive on this planet. And yet, so many openings have come as a result of it. For me, and I think for many people, the pandemic gave time to really think about my relationship with God, the neglect of the relationship with God. that phrase I borrowed, like thinking about the seeds that had been planted in my heart and in my mind, like I stole that from John Sundara. He has a lot of things that are really worthy of being stolen. He said that a couple of weeks ago in this very setting. So thanks again, John. He's got a lot of good stuff that I'm selling. But for me, so during that time, like I think I tried to hold on to different anchors. And one of the things, so at the time the pandemic happened, my wife and I, we had our daughter Maggie had been born in October. So in March she was 5 months, and then our oldest daughter Ellie, she was like 4. So also fun fact, my wife's a school principal, middle school principal with Kip. So our children are doomed. They are doomed. I'm still in education. I'm a consultant now, so I'm always like, I want to talk to your head of school about the quality of your math curriculum. She's in kindergarten, but I'm like, I'm not so sure that this is high quality instructional materials. But anyways, I digress. So during the pandemic, we were both working full time. I'm trying to open a school. She is trying to run a school and keep it open through virtual learning and all of that. And mind you, we also don't work at schools where kids have access to technology. So we're trying to think through how do you get every kid who lives around Sharpstown at Dunvale and West Park a Chromebook next week. It's a crazy time. So we needed help, right? Daycares were shuttered. What am I gonna do with my kids? They can't go to school. So we are very blessed that we have family that lives in Brenham, Texas. So we decided we're just gonna live with the grandparents until we can't anymore. So we left Houston and drove an hour and 20 minutes, and we stayed out there. And one of the things that we would do on Sundays is have a little church service, right? When I was a kid, fun fact, I don't have a picture evidence of it, but again, Southern Baptist. I idolized my preacher, Reverend Eisenhower, and I just thought he was just the coolest rock star dude. And I have memories of being embarrassed when my parents would catch me sitting on my bed, and I'd have my little table turned the other way like a pulpit, and be spitting the word of God.
You've never told me this.
I know. I've never told you this. Hot content for this one. So I idolized that man, right? And so during the pandemic, we would have these services, and I'm not about to lead our family in some Bush League service without actual thought put into it. So we're gonna do the lectionary, and you know what we're also gonna do? We're gonna go and find hymns that align with the lectionary readings for the week. So it wasn't bad. Yeah. It's pretty good for a home church situation, right? I don't think they liked the hymns that I picked out because, too traditional or too much blood in the references, because that's the Southern Baptist hymnal. So anyway, we pick our hymns and all of that. So an anchor for me has always been, but especially during this time of U-turn, was music. And I never knew who this guy was until this was post-pandemic. This was, about 2 years ago. You want to know who this guy is? No, there's no way you know. Huh? It's not Mozart. Yeah. I shouldn't have asked. It's not a good question. It's a guy named William Cooper, spelled Cowper, right? William Cooper, duh. And he is a very famous English poet, more so than he is with hymns. But many of his hymns were turned into very famous hymns. I see some people nodding oh yeah, he's got great work. And he is someone who himself struggled with great darkness in his life. I found this awesome book at a book sale that Wesley will not let me live down because I didn't invite him to go to it. I paid $2 for this book. Also a plug for the book sale in Brenham, Texas by the Fortnightly Club every year in February. But I found this great book that was 1 year of hymns. So every day gives you a different hymn and a story. And I stumbled upon this. The book happened much later. I stumbled upon this story, but it tells it pretty succinctly. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it and then talk to you about this particular hymn that was an important anchor for me. So William Cooper, whose poems appear in most collections of great English literature, were beset with emotional problems throughout his life. His mother died when he was 6. At school, he was teased and ridiculed, and his father prevented him from marrying the love of his life. Man, right?
Shakespeare.
Shakespearean, right? He was forced to study law. I hear you, man. But quit in the first week, get your money back. He panicked when he learned he would have to have his bar exam before the House of Lords. He struggled with anxiety in all seriousness. He tried to take his own life 6 times, most of the time by drowning. You think about the darkness that one must experience. I mean, this was 19th century. There were plenty of other options. So he struggled with great darkness, which at the time, obviously, I identified with like viscerally. And for him, so he was actually, after he tried to take his life a few times, he was committed, as was common at the time, to an asylum, but he was later released into the care of a Christian couple. And it seemed for him that hymn writing was one of the best therapies that he could kind of channel some of his energy into. I don't think there's a terribly happy ending to the story. I think he frequently lapsed into some pretty deep depression, and it's evident. And I want to share. So one of his hymns, which you can find in our hymn book, can't find this, I don't think, in my Southern Baptist hymn book of my childhood, but certainly you can. It's on 677 for those who have a copy at home. But it's called, as most hymns, it's named after the kind of the opening line. So I'm going to read it so everyone can hear it and see it. It's God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable minds of never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. And this line was particularly poignant for me. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. And then this last one, I get chills even thinking about it right now. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. Mm-hmm. I mean, the music that's set to this is beautiful, but the poetry of it, it just hits you at the heart. So an anchor for me, someone who actually, I am most comfortable in the gray. I'm not a very black and white person. I'm not.
I wore this just for you.
For me, right? Too easy. That's a good-looking gray shirt, by the way. But for someone who is comfortable in that space of unknowing, this really resonated with me. And as a person for which that is true and was experiencing a lot of darkness that I certainly didn't understand, I knew wasn't, I have a strong conviction is not caused by God. But the Spirit moves in how we emerge from that depth and darkness. The line that, just blind unbelief is sure to be wrong. And yet, you're going to scan his work and think you know what's going on, but it's all in vain. Because ultimately, God is his own interpreter. Yeah. What's happening in your life is not in your control. Yeah. The great illusion that, we just keep rubbing up against constantly. But yet, that last line, and he will make it plain. Yeah. So for me, those lines and then that song, that was an anchor for me in kind of that dark time. There's another one that's kind of more my charge. I'll come back to that, but I'm interested, same question for you. What is an anchor for you in that time?
I think I may have preached this, so I'm sorry. And it will be the thing
Get some new material.
That's right. And it'll be the same thing that I say on my last Sunday here, whenever that is. Many, many years. But I got this olive wood carving from a dear friend. I was having dinner with Father Kamal Farah, who is an Episcopal Anglican priest who lives in Nazareth. And he is a Palestinian Christian and a dear friend of our family. And I was having dinner at his house just me and him. I was 15 years old. I had snuck out of our youth pilgrimage and jumped into his car, and we had dinner at his house, and I got scolded.
There's that Wesley off doing
That's
tomfoolery.
right. That's
He's hanging
right.
out with a bunch of priests.
That's
Like,
right.
Come on, man. It's like
Nothing
that's the
surprising.
tomfoolery for this guy.
But it really was a beautiful, beautiful dinner, and I see him as one of my spiritual mentors, a hero in my faith of everything that he's gone through in his life and how he ministers in Nazareth and around the Galilee area. And at the end of the night, he had a number of these kind of on his shelf, and he said, "I'd like for you to have one. Pick one that you like." And as an American, you go, "No, no, 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 I will not receive it." And he went, "No, you have to take one before you leave." And it is Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And thinking about what ministry is the model of Jesus, but also these moments of allowing Jesus to wash your dirty feet. And thinking about what is home and what is place, what is the meaning of place, that Jesus had Nazareth as a hometown. He had Capernaum as kind of a home base, but time and again, the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head. And thinking about even his nativity, of this sense of that Jesus made his place the people he was with. And what does it mean for the disciples, even those that continued to be confused by him, that left him in his greatest hour of need, that at the resurrection, he wanted to be right back with them. And so what does it mean as a kingdom people to be drawn to that community and to find your home not in just a particular place, but in a certain people group? In this sense of the church, that is what it is, and its purest, most beautiful form is a community rooted in who Christ is and what he has constituted as his body. So for me, that wood carving, olive wood carving, has been kind of, it sits on my desk, wherever that desk may be, knowing that we are united one to another, the living and the dead, as the church, as his body.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's, yeah. For me, I mean, much like that kind of physical representation, like it's almost like for you, it's like a symbol of the reality of things. Yeah. And for me, that hymn, that poem by William Cooper, very much is like a symbol of the reality of things. Even in our darkest moments, our U-turn moments where we're not sure, like we know we're turning the car around, but we have no idea where we're going. That the reality is, like, God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Like, what reassurance. You know, we look for like the fix, right? That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to look for the fix. Right therapist, right medicine. And I'm not saying that those things have not dramatically, in an integrated way, helped me and have helped millions of others. And I wish that more people, I wish the conversations that like what we're having right now about mental health were ones that more people were engaged with. And I'm very hopeful that actually that is the case. Because I think it's a both and, right? I always joke with my therapist, I'm like, everything we've talked about the last 50 minutes, I know we didn't talk about Christ, but it's all pretty much about Jesus Christ. Like, this is all, like, you know, I can cite a lot of verses about what you're saying right now, or what we're talking about. But the other thing that I wanted it's been an anchor, less about that helps me understand the reality of things and more and how God works, but more about kind of a daily charge and how to continue to live given this reality. Is a poem. I love poetry. I love hymns. It comes from this book, and it actually has a weird origin story for how it ended up in my life. So the book is called Gorillas of Grace. The title needs some work. It's not the best, I wouldn't say. Prayers for the Battle. Ted Loder, guy in the middle, he's since passed, but he was a United Methodist preacher, apparently. I don't know a ton about his life. Quite influential, wrote a lot, but he's one heck of a poet. And this is a book of prayers, and I'm going to show you one and read as well, and we'll include it in the show notes. But I learned about this poem, which really for me has become like something I hold on to as a daily meditation, was because of this guy on the right. So during the pandemic, I got into watching a lot of online church services. Like when I was in my car, like it's a weird.
Can you see why we're friends now?
You can see why we're friends. Like I listen to a lot of preaching. And somehow I stumbled upon First Congregational Church of Houston, which is like super close to my house, and this guy who happens to be their senior pastor. And one day on his Zoom church, where it's literally just him in his study leading a service during the pandemic, he read this poem because it is a prayer, okay? And unbelievably, it came in my life in like June of 2020, and here I'm sitting with you in, what month are we in? March of 2023, and it sticks with me. I give this book as a gift to people all the time and put a note on this page because it's impactful. And I think as we think about these U-turn moments, it has a lot to offer. Text is small, but I'm going to read it slow, okay? So this is from Ted Loder, and for me, this is, if the hymn and the poem from William Cooper, God Works in Mysterious Ways, is again my reassurance in this reality of living, then this is most certainly the poem that is kind of my daily charge. And it's like, all right, if that's reality, this is how I want to live. And it's called Loosen My Grip. Oh God, it is hard for me to let go. Most times, and the squeeze I exert garbles me and gnarls others. So loosen my grip a bit on the good times, on the moments of sunlight and starshine and joy, that the thousand graces they scatter as they pass may nurture growth in me rather than turn to brittle memories. Loosen my grip on those grudges and grievances I hold so closely, that I may risk exposing myself to the spirit of forgiving and forgiveness that changes things and resurrects dreams and courage. Loosen my grip on my fears, that I may be released a little into humility and into an acceptance of my humanity. Loosen my grip on myself, that I may experience the freedom of a fool who knows that to believe is to see kingdoms, find power, sense glory. To reach out is to know myself held. To laugh at myself is to be in on the joke of your grace. To attend to each moment is to hear the faint melody of eternity. To dare love is to smell the wild flowers of heaven. Loosen my grip on my ways and words, on my fears and fretfulness, that letting go into the depths of silence and my own uncharted longings, I may find myself held by you and linked anew to all life in this wild and wondrous world you love so much. So I may take heart, so I may take to heart that you have taken me to heart. I mean,
That's good. I hope that as we kind of close this conversation, one thing that I'm getting from it, Ryan, is that U-turns remind us that we are not in control, and that that's okay. That's actually kind of maybe the point of this whole Christian walk, is to actually to be a good sheep, trusting the good shepherd. You have to let go of that agenda, whatever that may be, trusting that the path itself in the end is both Christ.
Yeah. And living in that tension that I think for a lot of people, particularly in my generation, when you say things like, I surrender all, I give up that control, we think that means that we are not free. We think that means you don't need to make plans. You can just let life wash all over you. And I think the Christian call is to live in that tension between God works in mysterious ways. We have the great privilege of being a part of that. And yet we are not in control.
Yeah.
And that is the tension that is, it's unanswerable. right? It's the place I feel like that puts us, it's uncomfortable, but at least for me and where I am in my own Christian walk now, it's the place where I feel closest to God and in right relationship.
And so I think we're kind of coming to this like really beautiful, we did not plan this, but thinking about what does it mean to be in the gray, but what does it mean to do that not alone as a solitary sheep, but to then, and this is kind of where our relationship comes back, of kind of this random connection. And C.S. Lewis, who, do we talk about C.S. Lewis here?
I've never heard of this
Yeah,
church.
Clive Staples.
Not enough C.S. Lewis at St. Martin's Episcopal.
But C.S. Lewis says you find a genuine friend when you're able to look at something and say, you too, like you have that passion, that drive, that same thing. And in some ways, what the Christian ideal of friendship is looking at Christ and going, let's walk in that direction together. And so that even in these crisis moments, these times of grief, of not knowing what's coming next, or times of major changes in life with jobs, children, that we come to this moment and find people that God has put in front of us and said, all right, let's walk together. And I feel that way with you all. I mean, this parish is really being able to walk alongside Megan and I and our daughter Hannah, and that we can do this together. And it really is kind of a testament to this church and what God is doing here.
Absolutely.
Cool.
That's where we'll end the episode. And thank you all for this grand experiment of talking into these weird pop screens. And, truly thank you.
Yes.
Because, again, to what I said earlier, like, we plan this and we have an arc, we know where we want to go, but it always constantly amazes me where we end up going, right? And that is me and my modern and post-enlightenment mind trying to resist the movement of the Spirit. And again, loosen my grip.
That's right. Thanks again for coming. It really is just an honor that y'all are here. Ryan will be autographing baseballs.
It's true, but I have 3 minutes because if I don't pick my daughter up, they will sell her. So
Thank y'all again.